I often feel like I'm a little spoiled for choice when it comes to the sheer selection of video games I have to choose from. Be they new releases or classic gems that I haven't tried yet, having more quality titles than I would ever have the time to play is a fantastic problem to have. For me, this goes double for indie titles. As someone who got into the indie scene fairly late, it honestly feels like I can't take 2 steps without discovering some brilliant new masterpiece that I didn't even know I wanted. This has its downsides, though. The problem with indie games in particular is that since there are smaller teams and usually less of a marketing campaign to push the game forward in a crowded market, it can be so easy to overlook a gem that could have become an absolute favorite. To name a few examples, Crosscode is an absolutely fantastic action RPG that I would have completely missed if it hadn't shown up during an indie presentation. The Messenger is a top-of-the-line platforming adventure that only came to my attention through The Completionist, and Fables is basically a new Paper Mario game. In the early 2000s, the first 2 Paper Mario titles proved to be prominent additions to Mario's ever-growing catalog of spin-off games, garnering critical acclaim, financial success, and the adoration of many a fan. And yet, the post-GameCube era of Paper Mario marked a period of rampant experimentation with the series. Some of these experiments worked. Others, famously, did not. Oh, Sticker Star, you inglorious pile of crushed dreams and missed potential. It's no secret that the fan reception for this particular title was about as volatile as a gasoline tanker put under a flamethrower, and for plenty of good reasons. Much of what made the previous entries great was stripped away, the game was riddled with baffling design decisions, and the fact that this apparently became the new standard for the series moving forward didn't go down very well. I'm personally in a bit of a weird position with these games. I liked Sticker Star more than I thought I would. I consider its sequel to be a good game, if not a great one, and I'm actually pumped for the Origami King. That being said, do I want a game that's more in line with what came before? Yes I do! Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door was a cornerstone of my childhood gaming experiences, easily my favorite Mario game, and maybe my favorite game in general. Well, that or Super Mario RPG, depends on how I'm feeling. I might like modern Paper Mario games a lot more than most people, but still not nearly as much as these. It's been over a decade and a half since TTYD, and we still haven't seen a proper sequel to it. I think Super is fantastic, by the way, but it's still a bit of an outlier. People clearly want a successor to this game, and that's where the indie studio Moonsprout Games comes into play, with their first and so far only game, Fables: The Everlasting Sapling. It still amazes me that I didn't hear about this game sooner. Like I said, indie games can be easy to miss, but when I casually came across one Twitter post about an indie spiritual successor to Paper Mario, and discovered that the game had been released in November of last year, it was one of the biggest "how did I not hear about this before" moments that I've ever had. And I was amazed that the game nearly missed my notice. I mean, I would have gotten there eventually since a new Paper Mario game dropped out of the blue about a week later, resulting in Fables coming up in online conversation a lot more, but back on topic. An up-and-coming indie team trying to recapture the magic of a fairly high-profile Nintendo series does sound like a tricky prospect. This kind of thing has been disastrously handled by those with much larger dev teams and budgets, so can a tiny team of newcomers really hope to succeed in a similar idea with their little insect-themed adventure game? The answer is yes. They did it. Oh boy, they did it! Bugs are some of the strongest creatures in the world, after all. With all the similarities between this and this, I think the best approach here is to highlight the similarities and differences between the two, starting with the most obvious point of difference, the setting, plot, and characters. Bug Fables takes place in the insect-ruled realm of Bagaria, a land formed by the Ant Kingdom's desire to find the legendary everlasting sapling, a mythical plant said to grant eternal life and strength to any who eat its magical leaves. The search proved difficult, and the Ant Kingdom opened its doors to the other insect kingdoms, resulting in the formation of the Explorers Association, with the intent of finding several magical artifacts said to open the way to the everlasting sapling. This is where the main characters come into play, as Kabu the Beetle and V the Honeybee join the association and become the newest exploration team, intent on finding the magical artifacts. As their first journey ensues, they join forces with a mysterious moth named Leaf and become the first team to make any real headway in recovering the artifacts. So yeah, the setting and context for the adventure are pretty different to anything in the Paper Mario games, even if the overall concept is basically the same. You're still in a chapter-based story structure, with each chapter being its own little adventure with a sparkly plot MacGuffin at the end of it. Well, at least for the first half of the game, things get shaken up quite a bit the closer you get to the end. It's a fairly simple story at the end of the day, but one that shines in its execution, with the characters really picking up the slack. Each member of the trio has their own personal stake in the adventure, which is elaborated on as the plot unfurls. You encounter many an obstacle on your journey, and you're not alone, as the team forms alliances and rivalries with the other exploration teams that are on the same missions as you. Speaking of the characters, that's actually another key divergence from Paper Mario. There are only 3 playable characters this time, as opposed to the larger casts of the games that inspired it. But this actually turned out to be an improvement in my opinion, especially when it comes to characterization. The playable Paper Mario casting was comprised of one silent protagonist and an abundance of partner characters. These partners were loads of fun, and easily a defining feature of the series, but they were still very much sidekicks. For as colorful as their personalities were, they were basically stripped of plot relevance as soon as their introductory chapter was over. Sure, they fight alongside you and commentate on the plot's happenings, but only if you choose to use them. Otherwise, they're basically irrelevant unless you need them to solve a puzzle or something. In contrast, these 3 are given equal billing as main characters, and their personalities are on full display for the entirety of the adventure. They learn, grow, and gradually develop from a slapdash crew of total misfits to a tightly knit team whose contrasting personalities are a joy to watch bounce off of each other. The writing in general in this game is really sharp and engaging, endearing me not only to the main cast, but to the people around them too. Now, onward to the gameplay. What similarities are there? Well then. Yeah, at first glance, the comparison between these games seems pretty one-to-one. The exploration, action commands, and leveling up is mostly the same. Medals are literally just badges, it has the same cooking system, the list goes on. Which begs the question, is it too similar to Paper Mario? Does the gameplay make any attempt to stand on its own 2 feet? Well, to be perfectly honest, I'd have been content with a competent knockoff at this point, seeing as Nintendo hasn't touched this gameplay formula for 16 years. This is literally exactly the kind of game I and a lot of other people have been wanting to play all this time, so this game could probably have been successful enough as a well-crafted imitation. But fortunately, the members of Moonsprout Games weren't content to rest on their laurels. While it might not be apparent at first, there are subtle yet meaningful additions and alterations that pull this game out of Paper Mario's shadow a bit. I already mentioned how differently the game treats its characters, and this does apply to combat as well. Instead of the sidekicks assisting the main powerhouse system of Paper Mario, each member of the trio is equally powerful and important, with each bug providing essential traits and abilities to the team. But easily the most notable difference comes about in one area: an increase in difficulty. It's not that Bug Fables is a particularly difficult or unfair game, it's just that Paper Mario was quite easy. It certainly had some challenging battles here and there, but the games in general were pretty lenient, especially when compared to most other RPGs. Bug Fables doesn't serve things to you on a platter. You don't gain as much of a boost upon leveling up, you don't have any star abilities to fall back on, your standard attack power won't actually go up without the aid of medals or temporary buffs, and healing items generally aren't as powerful as the Paper Mario equivalents. That last one is especially notable as it actively gives the cooking system more usefulness. In Paper Mario, giving the right ingredients to a chef could upgrade your items into something much more powerful, but since the regular items were plenty strong enough to see you through the adventure, these improved items could feel like overkill, making the whole system a fun, but often unneeded diversion. In Bug Fables, though, cooking is something you'll want to do more often, partly because you'll need it, and partly because there are multiple cooks now, which makes the service a lot more accessible. It's worth reiterating, though, that Bug Fables still isn't a particularly difficult game, it's just a fairly balanced game compared to a pretty easy one, so if you were worried about that, don't be. However, if you are the sort of person who likes challenges, the game gives you a hard mode medal, which not only makes the enemies tougher, but gives you rewards for defeating them. Definitely something that Paper Mario could have used. There are some other improvements over Paper Mario, but let's cut to the chase and get to the big one. The side quests. Oh man, the side quests. Honestly, side questing was one of the weaker elements of the old Paper Mario games. There was stuff to do, to be sure, and some of it was pretty enjoyable, but a lot of it was just basic back and forth busy work, especially in the first one. Bug Fables, on the other hand, not only has a proper quest log that lets you tackle any available quest at any time without having to constantly go back to the quest hub, but the quests themselves are of considerably better quality. I like how a lot of them are framed. Exploration teams are often called upon as peacekeepers and public servants, so there's an in-game reason why you'd be doing what you do, and you're sometimes assisted by other teams to tackle larger problems. It's a nice way to thread together gameplay and world building, and the quests themselves offer good rewards and sometimes even optional boss fights. Paper Mario had a few optional battles here and there, but now there are far more of them, especially with the new bounty quests that pit you against very challenging monsters for great rewards. Some side quests even lead to substantial character development for the main cast. Throw in some other stuff like enemy gauntlets and mini-games and you've got some substantial content to occupy you between the main story events. I could go on, but I think you get the picture. Bug Fables is not only a well-constructed love letter to Paper Mario, but manages to surpass it in some areas. Which brings us to an interesting point. Is Bug Fables better than Paper Mario? Well, I suppose now's a good time to point out some of Bug Fables' flaws. In spite of the aforementioned improvements, Bug Fables does flag behind its inspiration in a number of ways. Let's start with the most readily apparent one, the graphics. Paper Mario games are consistently some of the most visually appealing games on their respective consoles, but Bug Fables' presentation can leave a bit to be desired at times. I like the overall design of the world and the characters, but on a technical level, the graphics are certainly a little basic. The music quality is a lot closer to Paper Mario's than the graphics are. The composer, Tristan Ulrich, did a great job of capturing the Paper Mario vibe, with some of the battle music being particularly catchy, but while it's definitely a good soundtrack in its own right, it does become a case of good, but not as good. Finally, let's touch on the Overworld gameplay. The battle gameplay pretty much functions as it should, but the Overworld controls can run into some snags. Platforming feels a little imprecise, V's boomerang can be hard to control sometimes, and hitting these ice blocks around can be finicky. Stuff like that. It works for the most part, but it does show a lack of polish in places. Of course, these deficiencies have an obvious and understandable explanation, that being the far smaller team involved. While Moonsprout Games did have some help from backers on various aspects of the game, the core development team is just a handful of people. The fact that a team this small successfully recaptured the essence of Paper Mario so well is incredible. And while they don't have any plans for a sequel at the moment, they did say it's a possibility. Bug Fables, the everlasting sapling, was a delightful romp from beginning to end, chock full of charm, personality, and adventure, instantly turning this new indie team into something I'll definitely be keeping my eye on in the future. With all that said, I still haven't answered that last question. Is Bug Fables better than Paper Mario? Well, that's obviously a subjective matter, but my take on it is that both sides excel and lag in different areas. Bug Fables makes many notable improvements to the system, but the overall lack of manpower means it could only go so far, and in spite of its unique elements giving it an identity of its own, it's still very much running on borrowed material. Paper Mario has certainly been surpassed in places, but I still think they are the more polished experiences, with the obviously higher production values afforded by being attached to Mario. Also, in my opinion, Paper Mario's stories were still better in the second and especially third installments, but at the end of the day, I don't see much merit in trying to pit the two against each other. I'm just honestly glad we have both.